At 9:35 on the morning of April 18, 1943, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat in the cabin of a Mitsubishi G-4M bomber flying low over the jungles of Bougainville Island. 59 years old, 37 years in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, the most famous military strategist in Japan, and completely unaware that 16 American P-38 Lightning fighters were climbing toward him from the south, their pilots carrying orders to kill him at any cost. The man who knew America better than any Japanese leader alive was about to die because of something he had gotten profoundly wrong about the Americans. Yamamoto had spent 3 years in the United States. He had studied at Harvard. He had traveled the country by hitchhiking through oil fields in Texas and Mexico. He had played poker with American naval officers in Washington and beaten them so consistently that he developed contempt for their mental agility. He spoke fluent English. He understood American industrial capacity better than most Americans did. He had warned his own government repeatedly that war with America would be suicide. And yet here he was, 17 months after Pearl Harbor, watching his country lose a war he had predicted they would lose. The 6 months he had promised to run wild had long since passed. His carriers lay at the bottom of the Pacific. His pilots were dead. His fleet was crippled. The Americans were building ships faster than Japan could sink them. The question that haunted Yamamoto in those final seconds wasn't whether Japan would lose. He had known that since December 7, 1941. The question was simpler and more painful. How had a man who understood America so well gotten the Americans so completely wrong? If you want to understand how Yamamoto's beliefs about America led to Japan's greatest strategic disaster, hit that like button. It helps us share more untold stories from history. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Yamamoto. To understand what he believed about the Americans and why it proved fatal, you need to understand where those beliefs came from. Isoroku Takano was born on April 4, 1884, in Nagaoka, a small town in northern Japan. His father was 56 years old, which is why the boy was named Isoroku, an archaic Japanese word meaning 56. His family were former samurai, but the Meiji Restoration had stripped them of their hereditary rank and wealth. Isoroku grew up poor in a cold fishing village, eating little, working hard, and developing the stubborn determination that would define his career. At 16, he took competitive examinations for the Naval Academy at Adajima and scored second out of 300 students. The academy was brutal. No smoking, no drinking, no sweets, no contact with women. Physical training designed to break weak candidates. Isoroku survived it all and graduated in 1904 as 7th in his class. 1 year later, he experienced something that shaped his entire understanding of naval warfare. At the Battle of Tsushima Strait in May 1905, the Japanese Imperial Navy annihilated the Russian Baltic Fleet in one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. The Russians had sailed 18,000 nautical miles from Europe to the Pacific. The Japanese destroyed 21 ships, killed 4,380 men, and captured nearly 6,000 prisoners. Japanese losses were 3 torpedo boats and 117 men. Ensign Takano served aboard the cruiser Nishin. A shell exploded near him, throwing shrapnel through his body and ripping off 2 fingers on his left hand. He spent 2 months in hospital recovering from wounds that would mark him for life. Tsushima taught young Isoroku 2 lessons he never forgot. First, a decisive battle could end a war in a single afternoon. The Russians sued for peace within weeks. Second, surprise and audacity could overcome superior numbers. The Japanese fleet had been smaller, but it had been faster, better trained, and more ruthless. These lessons would echo through everything Yamamoto believed about war, including his catastrophic beliefs about America. In 1916, after his parents died, Isoroku was adopted by the wealthy but childless Yamamoto family. He took their name and their fortune. 2 years later, he married Reiko Mahashi, the daughter of a dairy farmer. They would have 4 children, though Yamamoto spent most of his married life away from home, building a naval career that took him across the world. In April 1919, the Imperial Japanese Navy sent him to Harvard University. He was 35 years old when he arrived in Boston. A lieutenant commander with combat experience, missing 2 fingers, fluent enough in English to study economics and petroleum sources at one of America's finest universities. He lived in rented rooms in Brookline, a suburb of Boston, and threw himself into understanding everything about the United States. He studied American oil production obsessively. Oil was the lifeblood of any modern navy. Without oil, warships became floating coffins. Japan had almost no domestic petroleum reserves. The United States had more than any nation on Earth. Yamamoto toured oil fields in Texas. He hitchhiked to Mexico to study their refineries. By the time he left Harvard in 1921, American oil companies had offered him jobs. He understood their industry better than most of their own executives. But Harvard gave Yamamoto something more than technical knowledge. It gave him his first sustained exposure to Americans themselves. He learned to play poker. The game became an obsession. He would stay up all night, reading his opponents, calculating odds, bluffing with a face that revealed nothing. When asked how he mastered the game so quickly, he replied, "If I can keep 5,000 ideographs in my mind, it is not hard to keep in mind 52 cards." He used his poker winnings to finance his hitchhiking adventures across America. He saw the factories of Detroit, the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the shipyards of the East Coast. He watched assembly lines producing automobiles at a pace that seemed almost inhuman. He saw the scale of American industry with his own eyes. And he developed a theory about the American people themselves. Yamamoto believed that Americans were soft. He watched them play golf and bridge at their country clubs. He saw their comfortable lives, their consumer goods, their obsession with convenience and entertainment. He beat them consistently at poker and concluded that they lacked the mental discipline for sustained strategic thinking. He respected their industrial capacity. He feared their factories and their oil reserves and their shipyards. But he did not respect their fighting spirit. He believed that a nation raised on refrigerators and automobiles could not match the warrior culture of Japan. This was the first great error in Yamamoto's thinking. He confused comfort with weakness. He mistook prosperity for decadence. He failed to understand that the same people who built comfortable lives for themselves could also, when provoked, build the most devastating war machine in human history. He would spend the rest of his life discovering how wrong he was. After Harvard, Yamamoto returned to Japan and began his climb through the naval hierarchy. He commanded ships. He taught at the Naval Staff College. He became an early advocate for naval aviation, arguing that aircraft carriers would replace battleships as the decisive weapons of naval warfare. Most senior officers dismissed him as a radical. Events would prove him right. In 1926, the Navy sent him back to America, this time as naval attaché at the Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C. He spent 2 more years studying the Americans, playing poker with American military officers, and refining his theories about American character. He developed what he called a low opinion of American naval officers. He found them more interested in golf and social functions than in serious strategic thinking. He beat them at cards so consistently that he earned substantial winnings. He concluded that Americans were clever at business but weak at warfare. This was his second great error. He was playing poker with peacetime officers in the comfortable world of embassy dinners and diplomatic functions. He was not seeing Americans at war. He was not seeing what happened when those comfortable, card-playing officers had their country attacked and their friends killed. But Yamamoto also developed something more dangerous than contempt. He developed respect, but only for American industry. He visited shipyards. He toured factories. He calculated production figures. He understood, perhaps better than any Japanese leader, that America could outproduce Japan by a factor of 10 or 20 or even more. He knew that in a long war, Japanese courage and discipline would count for nothing against American steel and oil and aircraft. This knowledge would haunt him for the rest of his life. In December 1936, Yamamoto was appointed Vice Minister of the Japanese Navy. He had reached the inner circles of power, and he used his position to argue against the policies that were pushing Japan toward war. He opposed the tripartite pact with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, warning that it would guarantee American hostility. He opposed the aggressive expansion into China, arguing that it was draining Japanese resources and inviting international condemnation. He spoke so openly against the militarists who controlled the Japanese government that they threatened to assassinate him. In August 1939, to save his life, the Navy minister assigned Yamamoto to command the combined fleet. It was technically a promotion, but everyone understood the real purpose. At sea, commanding the fleet, Yamamoto was safe from the assassins who wanted him dead. He took command knowing that the same militarists who wanted to kill him were dragging Japan toward a war he believed could not be won. In November 1940, Prime Minister Fumimaro Kono asked Yamamoto directly about the prospects of war with America. Yamamoto's answer became one of the most prophetic statements of the Second World War. "If I am told to fight regardless of the consequences," Yamamoto said, "I shall run wild for the first 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year." He told Kono that if Japan had to fight, there was only one strategy that offered any hope. Strike first. Strike hard. Destroy the American Pacific Fleet before the Americans could mobilize their industrial might. Force a negotiated peace before American factories could build the ships and planes that would overwhelm Japan. It was a gambler's strategy. All or nothing. Win in the first hand or lose everything. Yamamoto, the poker player, was applying his card table philosophy to global warfare. And at the heart of this strategy lay his fundamental belief about American character. He believed that a sudden, devastating blow would dispirit the American people so thoroughly that they would not recover. He believed that Americans, comfortable and soft, would choose negotiation over a long, bloody war in the Pacific. This was his third and most catastrophic error. By May 1940, Yamamoto had begun planning the attack on Pearl Harbor. He had watched training exercises where Japanese torpedo bombers attacked warships at anchor, and he saw the potential for a decisive blow against an enemy fleet in port. The British attack on the Italian fleet at Taranto in November 1940, where carrier aircraft sank 3 battleships in a single night, confirmed his thinking. He assembled a task force of 6 aircraft carriers, the largest carrier strike force ever assembled. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, Zuikaku, 353 aircraft, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines. All of it pointed at Hawaii. The Japanese General Staff opposed the plan. They called it too risky, too audacious, too far from Japanese waters. Yamamoto threatened to resign if they rejected it. The emperor sided with him. The attack was approved. On December 7, 1941, at 7:48 in the morning Hawaiian time, the first Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. The attack was a tactical masterpiece. In 90 minutes, Japanese aircraft sank or damaged 18 American ships, destroyed 188 aircraft, and killed 2,403 Americans. The battleship USS Arizona exploded and sank with 1,177 men trapped inside. The battleship USS Oklahoma capsized, trapping 429 sailors below decks. Japan had not yet delivered its declaration of war when the bombs began falling. The attack that Yamamoto designed became the very symbol of treachery. Aboard his flagship Nagato, anchored in Japanese waters, Yamamoto received the reports of victory with something other than celebration. When a staff officer described the devastation at Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto is reported to have said, "A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply, for the one smitten." He knew what he had done. He had awakened something that Japan could not fight. The famous quote often attributed to Yamamoto, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve," may or may not be authentic. Historians have never found the original source. But authentic or not, the sentiment captured exactly what Yamamoto understood in those first hours after Pearl Harbor. He had been wrong about the Americans. They did not crumble. They did not despair. They did not negotiate. Instead, they did something Yamamoto had never predicted. They became angry. President Franklin Roosevelt called December 7th a date which will live in infamy. Congress declared war within hours. Recruiting stations across America were overwhelmed with volunteers. The men who had played golf and poker in peacetime were suddenly willing to die in war. Yamamoto had studied American industry. He had calculated their production capacity. He knew they could build more ships than Japan. What he had not understood was the fury that would drive that production. For exactly 6 months, Yamamoto's prediction held true. The Imperial Japanese Navy ran wild across the Pacific. They captured the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Burma. Japanese forces controlled territory stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Central Pacific. It was the greatest military expansion in Japanese history. But 6 months to the day after Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto's strategy collapsed. On June 4, 1942, Japanese and American carrier forces clashed near Midway Atoll, a tiny island 1,000 miles northwest of Hawaii. Yamamoto had planned another decisive blow, this time to destroy the American aircraft carriers that had escaped Pearl Harbor. He assembled another massive fleet. He devised an elaborate plan involving diversionary attacks on the Aleutian Islands and an invasion force for Midway itself. The plan was too complex. He divided his forces into 8 separate task groups spread across thousands of miles of ocean. He assumed the Americans would react predictably. He did not know that American codebreakers had deciphered Japanese naval communications and knew exactly where his carriers would be. On the morning of June 4th, American dive bombers from the USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown found 4 Japanese carriers with their flight decks crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed. In 5 minutes, bombs turned the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu into flaming wreckage. The Hiryu was destroyed hours later. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, 1 cruiser, and 292 aircraft. More importantly, they lost over 100 experienced pilots who could not be replaced. The same carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor now lay at the bottom of the Pacific. Yamamoto took to his bed on his flagship Yamato, reportedly falling ill with the weight of the defeat. He had gambled everything on knocking America out of the war quickly. He had lost. The Battle of Midway occurred exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, almost to the day. Yamamoto's prediction of running wild for 6 months had been accurate. Everything else he believed about America had been catastrophically wrong. After Midway, the war became exactly what Yamamoto had feared most. A long, grinding, attritional conflict in which American industrial power would slowly overwhelm Japanese courage and sacrifice. American shipyards, which had launched more vessels in 1941 than Japan would launch during the entire war, accelerated to impossible speeds. In 1939, annual American aircraft production had been less than 3,000 planes. By 1944, they were producing over 96,000 aircraft per year. America built more planes in 1944 alone than Japan built during the entire war. The numbers were staggering. By the end of the war, American industry had produced 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million Army trucks. American shipyards built almost 9,000 warships, more than 3 times what all other nations combined produced during the conflict. In the 3 years following Midway, the Japanese built 6 aircraft carriers. The Americans built 17. Yamamoto had understood American industrial capacity better than any Japanese leader. What he had failed to understand was that American anger would unlock that capacity with a speed and fury that defied all peacetime calculations. The same Americans who had seemed soft and comfortable in their country clubs transformed into something Yamamoto had never imagined. Women flooded into factories. Workers pulled 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. A Liberty ship that took 250 days to build in early 1942 was being completed in less than 50 days by late 1943. This was not the America Yamamoto had studied at Harvard. This was not the America whose poker players he had beaten in Washington. This was a nation transformed by rage into the most productive war machine in human history. The comfortable, decadent Americans were building an arsenal that would crush Japan beneath its weight. By early 1943, Yamamoto could see the end coming. The Guadalcanal campaign had ended in Japanese defeat and evacuation. American forces were advancing island by island through the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy was bleeding ships and men it could not replace. In March 1943, Yamamoto wrote to a friend, "I sense that my life must be completed in the next 100 days." He was wrong by 48 days. On April 18, 1943, exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, Yamamoto flew from Rabaul to inspect Japanese air units in the Solomon Islands. American codebreakers had intercepted and deciphered his travel itinerary. They knew exactly where he would be and exactly when he would arrive. The mission was called Operation Vengeance. 16 P-38 Lightning fighters took off from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal at 7:15 in the morning. They flew more than 400 miles at treetop level over open ocean, navigating by compass and wristwatch, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection. Major John Mitchell led the mission. For P-38s were designated the killer flight, assigned to attack Yamamoto's transport aircraft. The rest would provide cover against Japanese fighters. At 9:34, 1 minute before the scheduled intercept time, the Americans spotted two Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers descending toward Bougainville with an escort of 60 fighters. Yamamoto was aboard one of those bombers. The killer flight dropped their external fuel tanks and climbed to attack. The Zeros scrambled to intercept. In the chaos of the dogfight, Lieutenant Rex Barber closed on Yamamoto's bomber and opened fire with 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. His bullets tore through the aircraft. The bomber's right engine exploded. The wings separated. The plane spun into the jungle of Bougainville and crashed, killing everyone aboard. Japanese search parties found Yamamoto's body the next day. He had been thrown clear of the wreckage but was still strapped in his seat, his white-gloved hand clutching his samurai sword, his body bearing 2 bullet wounds, one through the shoulder and one through the jaw that exited through his right eye. The man who had known America better than any Japanese leader, who had warned his government that war with America would be suicide, who had predicted exactly how long Japan could fight before American industry overwhelmed them, was dead. The irony was perfect and terrible. Yamamoto had understood American factories. He had feared American ships and planes and tanks. But he had underestimated the one thing that mattered most: American anger. He thought comfort made people weak. He thought prosperity made nations soft. He thought a people who loved golf and poker and refrigerators would choose negotiation over sacrifice. He was wrong. The Americans he had studied were peacetime Americans. The Americans who killed him were wartime Americans. And the difference between the two was something Yamamoto never grasped until it was far too late. His beliefs about American character led him to design an attack that guaranteed the very thing he most feared: a long, grinding war of attrition that Japan could not win. Pearl Harbor did not dispirit the Americans. It unified them. It enraged them. It gave them a reason to fight that no amount of Japanese victory could overcome. Yamamoto knew American industry. He respected American power. But he never understood American resolve. Japan's official announcement of Yamamoto's death came on May 21, 1943, more than a month after he died. His ashes were returned to Japan aboard the battleship Musashi on May 23. The nation mourned him as a hero. But the war he had feared continued for more than 2 years after his death. American forces captured island after island, building airfields within range of Japan itself. American submarines strangled Japanese shipping. American bombers burned Japanese cities. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another bomb destroyed Nagasaki. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. Yamamoto's worst predictions had come true. The war he had called suicide had killed his country. But here is the deeper tragedy of Isoroku Yamamoto. He was not wrong about everything. He was right about Japanese weakness. He was right about American industry. He was right that a long war would destroy Japan. He was only wrong about one thing: the American people. He studied them for years. He lived among them. He played cards with them and traveled through their country and analyzed their economy. But he never understood what would happen when they stopped playing cards and started fighting. The Americans who seemed soft were not soft. They were saving their strength. The comfort that Yamamoto mistook for weakness was actually the product of the same energy that would build the war machine that crushed Japan. Yamamoto's error was not ignorance. It was condescension. He knew America's numbers. He just didn't believe in America's heart. And that belief killed him, killed his navy, and killed his country. His story is a warning that echoes through history. Understanding an enemy's factories and resources is not enough. Understanding their weapons and tactics is not enough. You must understand their spirit. You must understand what they will become when you give them a reason to fight. Yamamoto gave America that reason at Pearl Harbor. And everything that followed, from Midway to Bougainville to Hiroshima, was the consequence of a brilliant man who understood everything about America except the one thing that mattered most. So what do you think about Yamamoto's fatal miscalculation? Did this change how you see the strategy behind Pearl Harbor? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you the way it moved us, give this video a like. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who need to hear it. It helps us share more forgotten perspectives from the war. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the decisions that shaped World War II. There are so many more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories about commanders who made choices that changed history, for better or for worse. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in Texas, Japan, Germany, Brazil? Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Admiral Yamamoto's story and the lessons it teaches about understanding your enemy is never forgotten.